Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Audit Committee meeting of Thursday, the 27th of March 2025. Thank you to those who are present for attending, and welcome to those who are watching online. We will start with item 1, apologies for absence.
Chair, we've received apologies from Councillor Marshall and Councillor Ho. And just to note that when this agenda was sent out, Councillor Robertson was on the committee, but he has now resigned as a councillor, just for anyone looking at the agenda.
Thank you. Item 2, declarations of interest. Item 3, the minutes of the previous meeting. So we'll go through those page by page, starting with page 3. Page 4, page 5, page 6, and the single word on page 7. No, we will sign those as an accurate record. That takes us neatly through to the first substantive item of the evening, the internal audit plan, charter and protocol for 25-26. If I can pass it over to you, Rebecca.
Thank you, Chair. So this is your proposed 25-26 draft internal audit plan for the committee's approval this evening. As the committee are aware, the council is currently considering options for the future service delivery of the internal audit. So this draft provisional plan allows audit work to continue in April while a preferred option is determined. So the plan has been put together based on risk and on previous audit history. So that means that where an audit hasn't taken place for a while, assurance is now required again. So the plan is based on a similar level of resources as previous years. So that's around the 250-day mark. We're at 254 days within this plan, and it's broadly on average in comparison with our peers. The average turns out around 240 days. So we are there or thereabouts in terms of resources. So the overall purpose of the plan is to identify the work required to achieve a reasonable level of assurance in compliance with internal audit's professional code of practice, and that's what the plan in front of you does. And I would just like to highlight that the audit charter, which usually accompanies the plan, is within the Global Internal Audit Standards update, so a little bit later on in the agenda. So the plan's been agreed with the leadership team and Anthony, a Section 151 officer, and is now before you at page 16 of your pack for approvals and any comments. I'd gladly take any questions, Chair.
Thank you. I'd like to start by thanking you for the benchmark there. I'm not sure that I've seen our audit plan benchmark, our audit resources benchmarked in that way. So it's nice to know that we fall roughly in the middle of our peers. Any questions from members?
Chair, I'm having difficulty maintaining connection at the moment, so just bear with me. I'm just back in. I don't think I had any questions, but I just want to double check.
Okay. You know when you're happy for us to move on if you don't have any questions.
No, I don't. Sorry.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you. No further questions. Thank you very much. So we are being asked to consider and approve the audit plan. So can I have a show of hands as to approval? Yeah, thank you. So that is approved, and we move on to item 5, a review of the effectiveness of the audit committee. And Rebecca, if I can ask you to.
Oh, thank you, Chair. So this report is your annual self-assessment of audit committee effectiveness. The self-assessment tool is based on the checklist accompanying SITFA's 2022 position statement, which was circulated to members in advance for their comments and observations. As Appendix 3, that's page 95 of your pack, details the collated responses received from 3 respondents. So those scores were received and collated based on the most frequent score first, or if no most frequent score, an average score second. So I'd ask the committee just to bear in mind that the results are based on 38% of our committee membership, so 3 out of 8. So we do need to exercise a degree of caution when analysing the results to determine areas for improvement. However, members, of course, have the opportunity to comment on the scoring and that improvement plan today. So where areas for potential improvement have been identified, that's through a score of 3 or less, actions to address those have been proposed in the action plan, which is within the report at page 22 of the pack. So just to summarise those actions. So first, enhancements to the Chair's annual report to Council. So I've prepared a draft which I'll be sharing with the Chair shortly before it comes back to committee in April. We're going to review the committee's agenda and align that to the core functions of the committee. The Chair has already highlighted to me that the terms of reference may need a refresh, so we'll look at that and any gaps will be addressed as part of that process. Training, always an action plan item. We have a session, members will be aware, on the 9th of April, and following that we'll undertake another skills analysis just to see where we're at, but again, refresher training is booked in for you there. And then finally, the inclusion of independent members on our membership. The paperwork is all in place with that, and we'll be progressing that recruitment very shortly. So the recommendations within the report are that the committee considers and approves the self-assessment checklist and endorses the action plan within the report. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Yeah, so in conversation before this meeting, I did discuss with Rebecca the terms of reference, which, following the training we've received during the last 12 months or so, I feel could do with a refresh. And so that's something we'll be looking at and then bringing back to committee. If any members have any thoughts on that particularly, then feel free to communicate those to me, and I can take those into account when I talk with Rebecca. And again, on the reference 14, we ourselves identified the need for training, and I'm grateful to officers for arranging that. We've got one left in the current sequence, which I'm sure everybody is looking forward to excitedly. And then the independent member, it's taken a little bit longer than we had originally anticipated when this committee first met 2.5 years ago, I think. But it is progressing slowly, and at this stage I think we're waiting for the next full council meeting, certainly to agree or to approve any compensation that might be available before we can take that further forward. Any questions from members on any of the other issues? Yes.
No, it's not a question, it's a comment really. We're about to go through the self-assessment of good practice, and one of the concerns I've got is that if only 38% of the membership of the committee responded to the self-assessment, that doesn't show a great deal of engagement. And it was a difficult form to fill in, and I was talking to Councillor Smith, he had some difficulty in submitting it. I also had difficulty, and I hope it went through. I haven't checked that. But, you know, the fact that only 3 members of the committee replied, that is slightly worrying in view of the fact that, you know, our training so far has been saying that, you know, the whole audit process is in the ownership of the whole council. We're operating on their behalf. And I wonder whether it would be appropriate for you, Chair, to approach group leaders or leader about the non-attendance of some of the members. I understand that you know not everyone can attend every meeting, and we've certainly got a verifiable reason for non-attendance from Councillor Marshall because of his recent injury. But you know it's not good enough. Again, you know, not all absent members have even submitted apologies tonight, so that is just worrying in terms of, if you like, the wider council ownership and even the audit committee ownership of what we talk about and discuss.
Yeah, certainly. It is an issue that is on my mind. We seem to have a conversation at around about 15 minutes before every committee meeting as to whether we're actually going to be quorum for this meeting or not. And when we start 3 members down, off the bat, then that's always going to be an issue. So it's certainly something I would look to raise with group leaders and or in full council when I next present the minutes. It's a difficult issue, and again the return of this form shows that we've pretty much, I assume they've been returned by those members who are pretty much at every meeting. So yeah, take that on board. Any other points?
There are some members that haven't actually turned up within this within the year at all, isn't there?
Within this cycle, we have a couple of members, well, 2 or 3 members that haven't turned up at all. Some of whom haven't provided apologies at all. So yeah. So
just clarify in terms of former councillor Robertson, I haven't had a notification to appoint an alternative member. I suppose things are in abeyance until the by-election takes place, but is that the case?
Absolutely, yes. So once the by-election takes place, at that point, we'll be able to do any necessary potential recalculations of political balance. And at that point, we'll get in touch with group leaders to work out if any new reappointments need to be made, and if so, appoint.
okay.
Is there any reason on this form why we've got such strange headings at the top? Like we've got a 0, 1, 2, 3 and then no 4 and 5.
It's a sit for form, councillor, so
Right.
no, I don't know. I could go back to sit for an ask, but yes, it is quite oddly scored. Yes, that's the sit for standard format.
I guess when calculating a numerical weighting at the end of the process, no further improvement is worth a lot more than minor improvement.
Yeah.
So yeah, the 1, 2, 3, 5 is the numerical value of the answer rather than just the order of the answer. Okay. Any further points on the effectiveness? So we are asked to consider and approve the attached self-assessment. Can I have a show of hands for approval? Thank you very much. And on to item 6, the update on global internal audit standards. Last one for you, Rebecca.
Yes, thank you, Chair. The purpose of this report is to update the committee on the new arrangements for internal audit under the global internal audit standards, the SIPRA application note and code of practice for the governance of internal audit. As committee are aware, the global standards replace the public sector internal audit standards on the 1st of April. We've undertaken a gap analysis against our practice and what is required now under the new arrangements, and it's positive to note that the majority of those new arrangements are already complied with. Global standards do tend to mirror the public sector standards, which is good news, and we have only relatively recently been externally assessed as compliant against public sector standards. That was back in 2023. Our audit manual has now been updated and a new global standards compliant audit charter, which has been approved by leadership team, is detailed for the committee's approval at Appendix 1. So that's page 103 of your pack. The remaining actions for full compliance are included in the action plan at Appendix 2, yet another action plan, and that's page 107 of your pack. So those actions for us are notably around regular training updates for auditors on ethics. That's a big theme coming forward within the new standards. For the production of an audit strategy, which I'll get on with for you, including the use of tech, which is something again that's quite new, and AI, those sorts of things, and to update the global internal audit standards as the performance standards in all future reporting. So when we have the annual governance statement, it will refer to the new global standards, not the public sector internal audit standards. I would ask the committee to carefully note the guidance and particularly the committee's role as set out in the CIPFA code. So if you read anything, read that one, which is the hyperlink at the bottom of page 100 of the pack. So whistle-stop tour of everything that is new in the internal audit world. These are our professional standards, and I think the committee can take some assurance that we're on track in terms of our compliance with them, and where we do have some minor items for exceptions, we've got a plan to achieve those. So my recommendations are for you to note the report and approve the new charter.
Thank you, Rebecca. And this is something that we've all been aware of coming over the horizon for, well, I think for the last 2.5 years nearly. So thank you for bringing that to us and bringing yeah, being the person that implements that. Any questions from members?
Thanks, Jay. Again, it's not a question, it's a comment in the light of the previous discussion we've had. It's good to see Councillor Vernon arrive to increase our membership here tonight by 25%. I'm just wondering whether, you know, it talks about, I think it's 3.6, my connection's gone again, but paragraph 3.6, it talks about our responsibilities as an audit committee. Are those confined to the people who turn up to meetings? Are those responsibilities of the whole membership of the committee, or are those responsibilities shared by every member of the council? Because it's slightly worrying if there are 2 or 3 of us taking, you know, decisions, not often decisions, but, you know, them making comments and questioning some of the reports if we're the sole people who are responsible rather than the council as a whole.
I mean, good practice council has to be adopted by, I mean, the council is those charged with governance, and then the audit committee in its entirety would be my answer to that.
Well, perhaps let the members who are rarely here know that they're responsible for the decisions that we take. That might force their attendance in the future.
Yep. Okay.
Thanks, Chair. Thank you.
Okay. Any further points? Okay.
I was just going to have one question just for the community benefit. If Rebecca could just elaborate what the charter provides in terms of internal audit's role for partnerships, subsidiaries, joint ventures, etc., given they're increasing part of the council's operation.
Thanks, Anthony. Yeah, it is. It's something within the new purpose that has come through as part of CIPFA's application note, actually, which asks us to set out sort of in terms of internal audit's role within partnerships and arm's length bodies. So things like the company, for example, and the assurance that we provide to yourselves as audit committee around those are very much now defined within the CIPFA's standards in terms of their application note on global internal audit standards. So it's very much prevalent that I think they're obviously CIPFA and global internal audit standards, remember, they're coming from a more commercial practice. So what CIPFA have tried to do is make it more public sector friendly. So I think what CIPFA are looking at is sort of the way of the world now, and it is that local authorities are having more to do with partnerships, having arm's length bodies, local authority, etc. So yes, it very much defines that role, and that we are there to provide that independent and objective assurance around those areas as much as anything else.
Yeah, it's there within that first bullet point on internal audit's mandate and authority, isn't it? Have full, free and unfettered access, not just to the council, but subsidiaries and partnerships, records, properties, personnel, etc. Yeah, so that's really clear there. Any further points?
Just to comment, the evidence is there for us that we've got that Appendix 1 about the partnership between Tamworth Borough Council and Lichfield District Council. So that's it in action,
Yeah.
in a sense, which is reassuring.
Absolutely, yes, thank you.
Okay. Thank you. And that takes us on to item 7, the report from our external auditors. We have Laura Anazola with us here. It's which one of you is taking that? Thank you.
I will, Chair. Thank you. And yeah, I just wanted to take the opportunity.
Hang on, sorry. I realise I haven't asked everybody to approve the audit charter, so formally approve the audit charter. Sorry for that. Yeah, okay. We don't approve. Carry on, Laura.
Yes, I just wanted to take the opportunity to introduce all audit committee members to Azola, who is the engagement manager for Lichfield District Council, taking over from Helen Parks, who you will have met last year. But the purpose of this report is just to introduce the external audit plan for the 24-25 year, and to say that the majority of our planning work now has been completed and has gone well. We are still looking to do a bit of top up between now and when we come to the fieldwork stage in the summer, but the majority of our work has been undertaken. So the purpose of this report is to introduce the significant risks and any other risks that we feel exist within the council, and that will be where we focus our attention on during the external audit. Very similar to the external audit plan we've seen in the prior year, and the risks haven't changed significantly, but regardless, I will go through them. Before I cover the risks, however, we use a concept known as materiality when we undertake our audit, and this is to ensure that we are again focusing our work in the areas which are material, and to do that we have to set benchmark based on a value. We use expenditure as the key driver of or where people will be interested in the council's money being spent, and we have selected 2% as our threshold for this year. That's a slight increase from the prior year. We recognise that it's our second year working with you. We didn't identify any significant concerns in the prior year, and there haven't been any changes to the kind of revenue streams or expenditure streams within the council, so we are happy to increase that level. We also set a performance materiality level, which is a lower threshold to which we test to, and that has been set at 875,000. However, sounds like a big figure. We do report any findings to the audit committee above our trivial level, and that's been set at 62,500. So any errors over that level, we will report formally to you within our ISA 260 or audit findings report. So just moving on to the risks. The first risk in the report is management override of controls. That isn't because we consider there to be a particular risk at Lichfield, it's a mandated risk that has to be set for all entities, regardless of whether they're commercial or public sector. The next 2 pages explain that we have rebutted the risk around fraud in revenue and fraud in expenditure. So again, there is a presumption that there will be a risk of fraud in all entities, but it can be rebutted if we're comfortable with the controls that the council has in place, the processes, and understand whether there is actually a risk of fraud present. So we do consider the risk in both of those areas to be low, but we have still set out the tests that we will do around them. The next 2 areas relate to estimates. So there are risks around the valuation of other land and building and investment properties, and also the valuation of pension assets or liabilities. The main reason for that is just the estimation uncertainty attached to them, and the council uses an expert to support them for both of those valuations. We do consider them to be a significant risk based on their size and complexity. The final risk, just to draw attention to, is a new risk for this year. And this relates to the fact that there is a new accounting standard that comes into force for 24-25. On a simplistic level, what this does is ensures that all leases are held on the balance sheet. And we recognise that there are two potential risks here. The first being around whether the council has accurately identified all of the leases that it holds. And the second then being, once it has identified them, have they been valued correctly and brought onto the balance sheet correctly? We are aware, obviously, with the fleet service, the waste service, sorry, there's going to be new fleet leased, and I think it's pretty close to the year end that could fall. So we're pretty close to the year end now, aren't we? But so we've included that as a risk, and we will look at it. The only other thing to draw attention to is the audit plan at the moment has been prepared on a single entity basis. So you might recall last year management did an assessment to consider whether the company, the trading company, is material to the group, and it concluded that it wasn't. But as Anthony said, it's becoming a bigger company, and that needs to be reassessed for this year. So whilst this is a single entity audit plan, we do have plans to speak with Anthony once the financial year concludes to assess whether that's still correct, and consider whether group accounts might be needed. But at this stage, my understanding is that that isn't considered to be required. But I recognise there was an audit committee in April, so if anything changes, we will bring a revision to the plan to that meeting. Separate to the financial statements audit, we also do work on value for money. At this stage, we haven't identified any potential risks of significant weakness, but we will undertake the majority of our procedures between now and the summer. But if we do become aware of anything, we have a requirement to report them as we become aware. I wasn't proposing to go through anything else within the report, but I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much. The first question that I have that immediately springs to mind, what's the threshold point at which the company becomes large enough that we have to consider group accounts?
So from our perspective, the council's assessment of materiality can be different. We would use the thresholds that we've set out on the table, so the 2% of expenditure, and we would consider group accounts to be required if any of the core financial statements were materially different had they been prepared on a basis.
Are we saying in effect that if the turnover of LWMTS exceeds 2% of the council's total expenditure, that's the point at which we would need to start preparing group accounts? From your perspective?
Yeah, not as simply as that, because there are intercompany transactions that need to be accounted for. I think often where we see that group accounts would be needed is if the balance sheet were materially different, i.e. cash, assets, because the income and expenditure, given it is a TECL company, and most of that income and expenditure in effect nets out on consolidation between the two entities.
Okay, so turnover minus inter-entity transactions, effectively.
Yes.
To dumb it down a little, because it strikes me that LWMTS is asset light compared to the council, so the balance sheet is never going to be huge, so that's not going to be an issue that would bring it within the needs for.
Laura said, I think the risk area potentially is the bank balance, cash balances.
Okay.
So last year it was over £1 million, so you are close to, if not over, the threshold on that particular balance. I suppose just to give my perspective on it, and Laura's right, it's a Teckle company, so there was a lot of movement between the two entities here. I've taken a less sort of numerical sort of approach to this on the materiality, and try. You can view it from, would the difference in the group or single entity influence a reader of the accounts' view on the numbers that have been presented? So not so much about a hard threshold, but would it influence? And that's more difficult to measure, that is, because your interpretation of what affects you is different to my interpretation of Laura's. So we'll have to do the numerical assessment once we've got some firmer figures in April and sit down with Laura. I mean, at the end of the day, if your external auditors believe it's necessary, we'll have to do it, and we've started preparing the working papers to do that. It will add 20 to 30 pages to an already large statement of accounts, and it will involve more audit. So hope would be we can avoid it, but if we have to do it, we will.
Sorry, you both referred to it as a Teckle company. Can you explain that?
So
not a phrase I'm familiar with.
So it originates from European law, and it relates to, I'm going into a lot of detail now, an Italian company that had a subsidiary in the printing business, as I understand it, and they spun it off to a subsidiary, and it was held in law that you didn't have to follow normal procurement rules if up to 80% of the income came from the host organisation. So it was almost treated like an internal department.
Yes. Okay.
So that threshold and that rule has followed through into the new Procurement Act.
Teckle being the name of the case law then?
I think it is, yes, for the European. So it may even be the company, I can't remember the name, but that's where it derives from. So it means that we can directly build contracts to the subsidiary without going through formal procurement processes.
Yeah.
Glad you asked that question, because I might have misheard. How do you spell it so that I can Google it?
Teckal.
Any further questions? Points to raise?
So I was just going to say, on Laura's point about the fleet as well, I believe that fleet is being delivered this weekend.
Okay.
So it will be before the end of the financial year.
Yeah.
So one group of lorries will be arriving, another group of lorries will be disappearing. So it's quite a logistical exercise.
Yeah.
In our budget, we assumed it would be next year, but it's having to come a few days early to enable them to set them up ready to be ready for the next week of collections.
Okay.
You're talking about over £6 million in vehicle assets, but we will, on our balance sheet, we will only include our share of that. Tamworth will then include their share of it.
Okay. Thank you. Any further questions from members? We didn't have a front sheet on this. Are we approving it or?
Yes.
Yes. Yeah. Okay.
Including the fee.
Including the fee. Yes. Are we going to show of hands for approval of the report and the fee? Thank you. And that takes us through to item 8, the work programme. Members will notice the addition of an item in every meeting for a meeting with managers as an aid memoir to as we head into the setup of each committee meeting that we call a manager to the meeting. Any questions, any points on the work programme? Okay, thank you. We've had some discussion ahead of the meeting whether item 10 is actually a part of this meeting, and we've come to the conclusion it isn't, so therefore we don't need to exclude the press and public at item 9. We just call the meeting to a close at just gone